How strong is Venti? And I don't mean as a unit in the game, I mean in lore and canon. How strong is he? Now, like last time, I gotta say, I'm not like a professional power scale or anything. I don't really know that much about that topic. This is just me, reading up on the lore and trying to come up with a general idea of how strong he is in lore with, a little bit of speculation. So, let's get into it. Venti, Barbatos, the animal Barcon, the animal Archon, the god of freedom, the tone-deaf bard, and sadly he doesn't have as many aliases. Sadly, he doesn't have as many aliases as his fellow Archon, and he doesn't even have like a horny nickname, as far as I know. But people seem to like doing this to his statue of him, so take that as you will. So, like last time, if you have watched, my Zhongli video, but you might have been not it. Oh, I'm a disaster. Anyways, let's start talking about his skills and abilities. Obviously, he's proficient with a bow. He's really good with a bow. He does flips with it. He's really fast, and sometimes he can even fire 2 arrows at once by accident. Because it's not all the time. It's sometime. So maybe by accident. He obviously has Animo Mastery. He can infuse his arrows with Animo. He can summon a small burst of wind to knock down enemies, and if he charges this attack, he can form a bigger wind domain around him and launch him up into the air and dispel more enemies. He can also create wind currents that propel others upwards, and he can create a massive vortex which draws in nearby enemies. Boosting others' powers, this one's a bit more speculative. Yeah, we'll go with that. But it's mentioned twice in the lore for the Skyward Blade that Venti blessed Dvalin and his fangs. Bless usually means to invoke something or someone with divine favor, meaning that he could have, empowered Dvalin. And also it could be argued that Venti blessed the Traveler with flight and the ability to fire Animo energy. But again, this is a lot of speculation. Let's go on to some more concrete powers. So he can teleport, he can fly, and he can shapeshift. He can also allow others to fly with the power of 1,000 winds. He can soothe bad karma. Bad karma is basically vengeful emotions of gods slain during the Archon War. This karma is so bad that it can drive people to murder their friends and kill themselves. Zhao, who has accumulated enough karma to consume flesh, bone, and soul alike. Jeez, had his pain relieved by the sound of a flute, played by Venti. I think I should mention that in the game it's just heavily implied that it's Venti, but for some reason they don't outright say it, but the story teaser for Zhao basically confirms it. I don't know if this is due to his powers or just that Venti makes some really good music and Zhao is just a huge Venti stan. I'm leaning more towards the latter though, because he's a bard. Venti can ascend spirits or allow them to pass on. He did this in his story quest. He can perfectly forge Rex Lapis's signature. He did this in the past to try to prank Morax. He has unique biology. His body is composed differently than normal humans, because Barbara couldn't heal him, and Zhongli's Ascension voice line says that his body is composed differently, although this could just be for Adepti. Venti has very high alcohol tolerance. Diluc, who works at a bar and owns a winery, is impressed by the quantity of alcohol he can consume. Really think about that. And lastly, he's immortal or has longevity. He just lives for a really long time. He's at least 2,600. Alright, let's find out how strong Venti, or rather Barbatos, was during the time of the Archon War. Now, originally I thought that before Venti got his gnosis that he was just a weak elemental spirit, that he says that he even says this in his storyline, but das is nicht correct. That's not correct. I'm sorry, I won't do that again. Because according to the biology of Gunhildr, very sorry for mispronouncing that by the way, the Jean fans in the audience will probably recognize that name. This is Jean's last name, and this book is about Jean's ancestors. So, during the time of the Archon War, Mondstadt was a land filled with ice and snow, and rampant blizzards. This was due to Andreas, the Wolf of the North. The Gunhildr clan was caught in a blizzard, But luckily for them, a wandering spirit heard their prayers and cries for help. These prayers and cries became faith. The faith gathered in front of the wind spirit like water flowing into the spring, and became the source from which the wind spirit drew its power. The wind spirit used the power to make a small shelter for the clan. So this means that in the Genshin Impact universe, some creatures can gain power through worship and faith. Anyways, we all know the story. Venti meets his bard friend. They raise an army against the tyrant animal Archon, the Lord of the Tower. But sadly, his bard friend dies in battle. After the Archon was killed, there was only two options that we know of currently that could take on the title of Archon, Andreas and Barbatos, meaning that they should be comparable in strength. I'm not saying equal, I'm saying comparable. Andreas is probably stronger because, Barbatos needed an army to challenge the previous Archon, and Andreas in the past could have challenged the Archon on their own, but Barbatos and Andreas should be at least in the same ballpark. Andreas was able to cover all of Mondstadt in ice and snow, and was able to continuously keep this climate up for many years. He was given this power from an ancient god, and like I said earlier, was able to challenge the previous animal Archon to the point where they had to create a wind barrier to shelter its people from the violent storms. So again, Barbatos was in some way similar in strength to this, as they are both qualified to claim the Gnosis. Anyhow, Andreas didn't think he was fit for the role of Archon because he didn't care much for humans, so Barbatos took the title. His first use of his power was to take on the form of his bard friend to play his lyre, and plucking its strings, he scattered the ice and snow and split the mountains with a divine wind. He changed the entire landscape of Mondstadt, so much so that the highest mountain in Mondstadt, Pylos Peak, was reduced to a small island off the coast. And actually, maybe an even more impressive feat than that was destroying the barrier that surrounded Old Mondstadt, or Stormterror's lair currently. This barrier was so powerful that Andreas, who again could cover all of Mondstadt in ice and snow, and who is also a very powerful creature able to manipulate Anemo, wasn't able to land a single scratch on the capital of the Lord of the Tower. And also obviously worth mentioning that Venti was one of the seven gods left after the Archon War. He is also one of the only remaining Archons from the original 7, alongside the Geo Archon. All the others have been replaced over the millennium. So, after the creation of the 7, Barbatos helped to establish the city of Mondstadt, and he didn't want to rule his people, being the god of freedom, set off and left his people to probably sleep for a few hundred years. Relatable. Very relatable. So, that's how strong Venti was during the Archon War. Now let's find out how strong Venti is present day, or currently, blah blah blah. The first time we see Venti in modern day Mondstadt, he's trying to heal Dvalin from the Abyss Order curses inflicted on him, but he's interrupted by the Traveler, who finds Dvalin, who flies off while Venti teleports away, which he seems to forget he can do later. Well, anyways, an enraged, manipulated Dvalin threatens Mondstadt, but we stop him with the friends we made along the way. And beating the shit out of him. So, before we get into feats, this is a bit of an assumption, but I'm gonna say that modern day Venti with his Gnosis and without are the same power-wise, because Venti doesn't really utilize his Gnosis properly. Venti himself states an Archon is required to rule over their people to attain power, and Venti hasn't really done that since the establishment of Mondstadt hundreds of years ago, and says that he is now the weakest Archon. So my thinking was that his power without his Gnosis would be the same because he doesn't really use his Gnosis at the time. Does that make any sense? Well, let's get into Venti's feats. Well, there's only one real notable feat as the time of this recording, and that is defeating Dvalin with the help of Jean, Diluc, and the Traveler, and Paimon was there, I suppose. Now, Dvalin is obviously a very powerful creature. He's part of the Four Winds who protected Mondstadt. When enraged, he created a storm and covered a large area of Mondstadt, and created a few tornadoes, and in the past he defeated the evil dragon Durin. Long ago, Durin arrived in Mondstadt and flew over, releasing toxic fumes. The people's cries were heard by the animal Archon, who summoned Dvalin to his aid. Dvalin, flying in, created giant whirlwinds that dispersed the venomous toxins. Dvalin then flew Durin to great heights and then fought in the sky in an intense battle. The battle tore the world asunder, veiling the sun. Eventually, Barbatos, using his music, created an opening for Dvalin to tear off the Durin's wings and rip out its throat. Brutal. And Durin fell upon a mountain later to be named Dragonspine. Dvalin had unluckily been exposed to Durin's poison, which caused him to retreat and sleep to recover from his illness. He was then later cursed and manipulated by the Abyss Order. Now, the Dvalin that we fought might be weakened due to the Abyss curse and maybe Durin's poison, although I doubt it would still still affect him after, like, all of these years. But, you know, you never know. But don't worry, Venti assures us that Dvalin is still very dangerous even after all these years.
After hundreds of years without use, Dvalin's teeth and claws are still very dangerous.
Okay, so we don't actually know how this fight went canonically, we just know that all of them were involved somehow. So, some people might have contributed more or less, but I would argue that Venti might have contributed a bit more than the other characters, because Venti is the character that you trial when you fight the boss, and Venti says that with his help they are now on par with Dvalin, so, you know, that's a pretty good feat. Now, after his Gnosis is taken, if we go by the thinking that when an Archon's Gnosis is taken, they revert back to their original power before obtaining it, which does have some credence because of Zhongli's voice line about his strength returning. This would mean that, like I said earlier, current day Venti could be comparable to Andreas, as this was his power level before receiving the Gnosis. Some people might bring up his fight with Signora to maybe downplay his power a little bit, but Venti obviously gets caught off guard and doesn't really put up a fight, because, you know, Signora is a little more conniving than, say, Child, who would probably try to go one-on-one with Venti. But it's also worth noting that Signora had to resort to a sneak attack, and the Cryo Archon still thought Venti was a big enough threat to get a Harbinger to get his Gnosis. Also, I think a good thing to keep in mind is Venti isn't really that much of a fighter compared to, like, Zhongli, who took a really active role during the Archon War, but we don't actually have a lot of accounts of Venti fighting a lot, unlike Zhongli, who has an entire stone forest full of dead and sealed gods under his belt. So I think it makes sense that Venti could be caught off guard pretty easily. So even if Venti had, like, more power or destructive capability than a Harbinger, he might not win due to his lack of proper battle experience, because, you know, he's probably more focused on alcohol and making songs. Although I have read that Venti had the highest kill count during the Archon War, but I can't find the source to substantiate this. So if somebody could tell me, that would be great, and you can just ignore everything I said about that. So, just to recap how strong Venti is in his prime, he was able to reshape all of Mondstadt, and in modern times he is able to defeat Dvalin with some help, and we know that Venti can gain power through worship and faith from the Gunadir lore, and even now there are still plenty of people that worship and believe in Barbatos, so it would make sense that he is still quite powerful. Same with maybe Zhongli, although I don't think Adepti gain power through faith, like, because Zhao, who is not well known in the human world, is considered powerful among the Adepti. Anyways, I would confidently say Venti is around Dvalin and Andreas' level, maybe a little weaker. This isn't a bad level to be at all, because both those guys can casually create storms covering all of Mondstadt, but, you know, that's just me. Some of this is up to interpretation, and some of it is just my thinking, so, you know, you guys can come up with your own answer with the info at hand. So, you know, how strong do you think Venti is? Do you think he's as strong as Zhongli? Do you think he could beat all the Fatui Harbingers? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely read a lot of the comments, especially like on my Zhongli video. Anyways, that's all I got on his strength portion. Let's, you know, get to the conclusion. Venti. What do I like about our favorite tone-deaf bard? I don't know. I just like him. His character design is nice, he has a fun personality. Also, I kind of like that he's a bit of a contradiction, because, you know, he's the god of freedom, and, you know, to be a god of something, you kind of have to have command over it. Also, he wants others to be free, but he tells them to be free, and as a Bourdains would say,
what does freedom really mean when demanded of you by a god?
I just thought that was interesting. Also, I like that his free-spirited, mischievous personality is kind of an act. You know, he's, you know, pretty perceptive and pretty smart. He sees the fake Stanley's ruse and lies to the adventurer that looks up to him. He also gives Stanley some closure by taking the real Stanley's spirit and letting it ascend. And when he's just alone with the Traveler, he drops the act and just talks to them, which is just a really nice moment. Also, Venti, by far, currently, at the time of this recording, definitely has the best story quest out of everyone, in my opinion at least. I also like the relationship between Liyue and Mondstadt. They kind of contrast each other, you know, Mondstadt being the land of freedom, and Liyue, well, like, not a dictatorship or anything, but everything in Liyue is deeply rooted in contracts and rules. But despite the differences between, you know, Geo and Animo, their respective gods seem to get along quite well. Venti used to go to Liyue regularly and drink with Zhongli and the other Archons. He even knows Zhongli well enough to forge his signature and try to prank him. I really hope we get to see them interact in the future. No, it's just, it'd be nice seeing a reunion between old friends. But anyways, that's all I got on the Venti front. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed that video. If you did, you know, leave a like, comment, subscribe, all that. It really helps, and I really appreciate it. And again, how strong do you think Venti is? You know, comment down. I'd love to read it. And also, I'm pretty confident I could do a how strong is video on a few other Genshin Impact characters, but I don't think I can do it on all of them. So, do you guys have any other ideas as to what other Genshin videos I should make? I have some ideas, but you know, it's nice to hear from the consensus. And, you know, looking into the lore of Genshin Impact and everything really makes you think. You know, you can learn a lot from Genshin Impact, especially from Venti. That, you know, sometimes when the day is right and the wind is in the right position, gliding would be faster.